So in our story, we see that the birth of our hero is going to bring joy, not just in the natural for his immediate family, but also for the whole world. That this promise of the angel is joy. But the angel goes further, because he says in verse 15 that John will be great in the eyes of the Lord. Let's look back a little bit. Do you remember that Dad was described as being righteous in the eyes of the Lord? And now here's the son being called great in the eyes of the Lord. There's a little bit here, can you see, of that sense of the heritage and the foundations. A bit of like father, like son. Father has lived his life to be a blessing to God. And now God has stepped in with this incredible new message of grace in the form of his son. But actually that heritage, those foundations that have been laid, are going on into his son. What foundations are you laying? What foundations and heritage are you building? Zechariah's motives were to please God. And then we see his son being born. And what we will see is that his motives are to please God. Where is our focus? Is it on pleasing God or pleasing man? Our immediate answer to that question might well be, well, of course I want to please God, and I'm more concerned about pleasing God. But to maybe help us unpack that, let's ask a couple of questions. And the first question is, where is your perspective? Who are you trying to impress? Are you trying to impress people? Or actually, are you more concerned about impressing God? Because let me ask, put that in a different way. You see, to love God's people is to reflect a loving God. And actually, sometimes we want to impress people rather than love them. And if we really have God's heart and we want to do what pleases him, then we will love other people. We will love his people. We will love the lost. But another question, if the first question is perspective, the second question is position. How much do you desire position? You see, Zechariah is a priest. He's part of a family line of priests. He's been serving faithfully as a priest all of his life. So therefore, when John is born, the natural expectation is that he's going to become a priest too. He's going to follow in the family's line. He is entitled to this. He's entitled to this sense of position and reputation that goes with it. But what we will see with our hero is that he exchanges the position for the purpose. He exchanges the priesthood for the prophetic. The third question is, where does your power come from? And where that power comes from sort of shows where we're rooted. If our heart is truly focused on God's heart, then we can take our power from that sense of God's presence and God's Holy Spirit. But sometimes we maybe try to draw our strength from places other than God's presence and God's Spirit. And when we actually have a heart that's focused on God's power and we're less concerned about worldly power, it takes the sting out of the enemy's arrows, that when things get fired at us, our security is rooted in something deeper, but actually takes the power out of the attacks of the enemy. So the question then has to be, are we drawing our strength from God's presence? Zechariah is here in the temple. He's getting this experience and this encounter in a holy place. It's a holy moment. And he gets a holy mission empowered by God. And it's actually when we're in the presence of God, when we take the time to be in the presence of God, that we can begin to learn God's heart. And maybe something of that sense of being rooted in that sense of the presence of God is why we get told that John will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. Most people, their encounter with the Holy Spirit and their filling with the Holy Spirit It's something that happens along the journey. But for John, it's different. He's going to be filled with the Holy Spirit before birth. My challenge to us is, what do we make of going into the presence of God? Because the more time we spend in the presence of God, the more we will learn his heart. So we're told that our hero will be great in the eyes of the Lord. Not great in the eyes of man, but great in the eyes of the Lord. And our question today is, what does greatness look like? I want to suggest to you that it's not about position, unless that position is before God. It's not about our preferences, unless our preference is to chase after the relationship with God. It's more about being in the purposes of God by spending time in the presence of God to get to know his heart and living for God's heart above everything else. I want to suggest to you is what greatness looks like.